Hello and welcome to Michael Bullock Watercolors. I'm Michael Bullock, and in this video I have edited two halves of a previous video series, how to paint a sun-filled doorway, into one video. It's a bit longer than normal, even though I am known for long-form videos. I filmed this at my studio in Artifacts 302 Gallery in historic downtown Farmington. If you're ever in Farmington, stop in, maybe grab yourself a snack, a cup of coffee or a lemonade at the Studio Bake Shop. Walk around Artifacts Gallery, check everything out, and please be sure to say hi. If you're new to the channel, please take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. It helps me to continue to bring you fun watercolor content. If you enjoy the video, consider sharing it with anyone you would think would also like it. I'd love to know where you're watching from, so be sure to say hi in the comments. I have talked to a few people who want to watch an entire video series in one fell swoop, so I thought I would try it out with how to paint a sun-filled doorway. This is a door located in Taos, New Mexico that I've painted several times, and I absolutely love to paint it. It's just kind of fun. You know, in the photo, it's a little boring, so I kind of zhuzh it up a bit with flowers and stuff like that. If you'd like to paint along with me, I'll have the link in the show notes below to the sketch and the source photo. So with that, let's get crack-a-lackin'.
So there's my sketch. Why don't I do this? That way you can kind of see the sketch that I did and then the source that I was kind of using. I didn't sketch in any of this cool stuff, but it is kind of fun to try and do a little bit, you know, like at least a hint of some of that texture of that hand carving. I'll show you guys how to do that. But you don't necessarily need to draw it in right away. Don't worry about that little detail. And you can see that I've simplified quite a bit. I liked all this little stuff and it was kind of interesting, but I just wanted to kind of simplify like around the window. And I simplified the door. I turned it into a doorknob instead of this kind of fancy latch. Just because it's easier and I'm not sure, like if I were really zooming in on that and took a picture of that door latch and really wanted to paint that, then I would probably spend more time with that than what I did over here. But this one, you know, I made my door quite a bit shorter than planned. You know, I kind of roughly sketched in this little porch light, and I'm not sure how I feel about this pot right here yet. You can't see I have this really light line right here, kind of coming down and then across here and then down over here on this side. That's where that porch comes in. Right about here, there's a little deal that comes down and it's a covered patio, so that casts that shadow. I'm going to clean off my palette just a little bit, and I kind of want this to be somewhat cleaner in this area here. So I'm going to start this with the kind of this wall back here. And yeah, I guess you can kind of see that. I forgot I angled the camera so you could see my. I'm going to start with this kind of wall back here, and then probably actually this foreground as well. Even though they're going to be a little bit different later, I think I'll do this whole wall here, and then this foreground. And I'm going to start with a little permanent yellow deep, mainly because even though it's a little hard to tell from the photo, but that was kind of later in the afternoon when you get that kind of lower sun that turns everything orange. A couple of these oranges, and then we'll move on from there. But so I'm going to start off, I think, with a little bit of this permanent yellow deep. If you don't have something like that, like a cadmium yellow deep or cadmium orange light, one of those kind of things, or Indian yellow. I have some Indian yellow here, and you can see it's so it's kind of almost between those two. So that's what Indian yellow is right there. I also have some azo yellow. That's this. So if you had something like that, it's just a little bit lighter, but still very similar. You can kind of see. So any of those would work pretty well. And I'm just going to start with a little of that and work my way down. You know, this is that place where the multicolored wash shines. And I'm just going to kind of work my way around these objects that I have here, like the door frame and the lantern with this permanent yellow deep. But I am getting to the point where I'm going to need to switch colors in order to have that multicolored wash. And I'm thinking about switching to permanent yellow orange
or cadmium. You could use cadmium orange. I'm putting this permanent yellow orange down where it's wet on it's wet on dry, but I'm adding it. I'm starting it where the paint is wet, so that I can get the two colors to run together. I can even add a little more water to it here in a minute to get them to run together better.
I'll use a little opera here too, just to get a little bit different kind of light in there. Switch back to this. Well, I might try this azo yellow. That's kind of fun. It's a little bit lighter, just a touch lighter without being like lemon yellow. Let's see. So that's a whole lot of that permanent yellow deep, and then I think I was using some azo yellow there. Go back to me. Actually have a little of this orange up in there. And then we'll come back over here with some of that. I have to move kind of quickly. That's a little too much because it's warm in here, so I've got like 3 fans going, 2 fans going. I've got the ceiling fan going, and it's drying stuff out pretty quick. So, although I'm not, overly worried about getting blossoms, particularly when doing like a stucco or adobe wall, something like that. I don't really worry about that too much. Let's see. I'm going to try a little Scarlet Lake, I think. If you don't have Scarlet Lake, there's any number of reds that would work fine. Alizarin Crimson would be a good one. Even Permanent Red. And I'm just kind of painting around where these, I've got this plant drawn in. I'm not overly concerned about it. Let's see, I'm going to kind of keep that light right on here. A little more of that up in there before that totally dries. So I'm just basically kind of going around this wall shape till I've got this kind of nice, kind of orange and pink and red wash down on me. Come in with a little more of that opera. Few spots. Now, some of this over here is going to be covered up by that shadow, but that's all right. Now, let's see. Let's come back down in here with a little... I have Scarlet Lake there. I'm going to now switch over to a little Alizarin Crimson, which looks very similar, but it's just a little bit different. Bring that down into there. And then I'm going to switch back to like Permanent Yellow Deep or Azo Yellow or Indian Yellow, whichever one of those you want. And even though this is going to touch, and I'm okay with that, I'm just going to kind of bring that in there like so. Maybe switch over to that Permanent Yellow Orange. And let's get a little opera in there too. Around with a little water. So right there, I put down a little of that opera, and then I cleaned my brush out. Well, really, I just stuck it in the water. So most of the paint came out, and there was just mostly water. And then I started moving that around on the page. That looks pretty good. That maybe just a touch more of that yellow. So it's right now it looks fairly flat because because it's almost all the same
value as everything. The whole section is the same value.
Use a little more of this Scarlet Lake down in here. Didn't think I had quite enough on there. I could have even used a little green in there or something. In fact, I may grab just a wee bit of this Permanent Green number 1. Put that in a couple of spots in here to kind of show that it's kind of moist, or what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe even a little dark blue, just to kind of give that a little variety. Kind of how you have those either concrete or stone halves, and they kind of feel a little damp compared to like other, or they appear that way. Flagstone, yeah, it'll kind of have that kind of damp look, and so that that could be kind of what this. There's a bit of moss or something growing in the cracks, or something. So that's where this color is coming from. So that was a little hooker's green that I dropped in there. And then this is a little peacock blue. That'll just kind of move this stuff around. Pick some of that excess water up down here with a thirsty brush. And you'll remember I'm just wiping the brush off, squeezing out most of the moisture so it's damp but not wet. And that allows me to pick up some of this excess moisture along there. You know, I kind of like how that looks. That's still damp enough. I think I might bring in just a bit of that green, maybe up in here, just to see what I think. And again, that just kind of gives it that earthy, and you're thinking, well, there's no green or orange or whatever, you know, it's all earth tones, and that's true, but this is a more interesting looking adobe. And just that hint of, a contrasting color kind of makes it a little more vibrant. Just that little hint of green, I think helped out, kind of made that a little more interesting and made this kind of pathway a little more interesting. With the peacock blue so I'm going to dry this really quick, I think. And then we can kind of start on the door. I kind of want to make this window a little small, and these lines are a little dark. I'm just going to roll my kneaded eraser over those, but then I'm going to make that window just a wee bit bigger. That worked. I just felt like that window is just a little bit too small. So really the only two things I kind of need to worry about are this doorknob and the window. So I'm just going to paint around those. We kind of want this turquoise door, but a lot of it's not going to be turquoise or cerulean blue or peacock blue or whatever blue that I'm going to use a variety of blues and stuff in this, but I'm going to actually start this with a little quinacridone gold. And if you don't have quinacridone gold, that's where raw sienna works really well. It's very similar. I just, I think I've said this a few times. I switched to quinacridone gold just because I like it a little bit better than raw sienna, but there's nothing really wrong with raw sienna. It's actually a nice color. I just like quinacridone gold a little bit better. So you can see it's kind of this earthy gold color, kind of earthy brownish gold. And so I'm going to start with a little of that, and I'm not going to really work my way from the top to the bottom. I'm just going to kind of start somewhere in the middle and go from there. So I'm just going to put some quinacridone gold down in some spots, and then I'm going to come back in and like right now I'm going to use some Andrews turquoise. If you don't have Andrews turquoise, cerulean blue is really nice. I'll be using some of that later on this same thing, so just a little of that. Maybe some more over here. Use a little opera into here. Right now that looks really strong, but I'm going to soften that back down with a lot of water. Oops. And it's okay that I got a little bit of water paint on my doorknob. I'm not too worried about that. I'm gonna switch back over to some alizarin crimson. Maybe here and maybe down in there. And let's try a little cerulean blue now. That's kind of a chalkier looking color. A little bluer than the turquoise, the Andrews turquoise that I was using. I think I want a little more of it right over here. I think I'm even going to grab a little bit of this permanent yellow orange, throw in a little of that in a few spots, just so it's got a little bit brighter orange kind of wood coming through. Maybe a little peacock blue. Let's bring some of that peacock blue in. Whoa, that's a lot. So that's a little better. We'll pick some of that up and pull it down in here. And then I always forget about this step. This step is wood, but unpainted wood, and I was actually going to do it as part of this, but I forgot about it. That's all right. Here's a little more peacock blue over here. Let's see. Add a little more water in some of these spots. Put a little more of that orange right in there. Really, actually, let's put some of that back over here. Let's go back to the Andrews turquoise. Kind of finish out over here with that. Maybe bring some more of it up in here. Let's go back to the cerulean blue maybe. Let it I'm going to pick up this side and let it kind of run that way for a minute here. Pull that in. I think I'm going to grab a little permanent magenta as well. Drop that in a couple of spots. Right in here where I want that to be just a bit darker. Let's see, what was I doing up here? Let's go back to some of that quinacridone gold. And then maybe back into some of that cerulean blue. And right now, this is probably looking like a big mess. That is okay. This door won't really come into shape. Right now, it's just going to look like this weird blue blob. It's not really going to come into shape until the very end when we go in and paint some details. We start painting in details to this door. Until then, it's just going to look like this kind of turquoisey, pink, whatever blob of blue. Grab a little more of that turquoise and drop that in. Let's drop in a little
quinacridone gold. In fact, I think I said alizarin crimson before, and I meant quinacridone gold.
And it's okay, I've got this kind of running over my doorknob and even over my stoop here, or step, whatever. That is okay. Oh boy, I really don't have. There we go. Sorry, I had this mostly angled at my palette. So just yeah, I mean it's kind of a messy blob of color right now, but that's okay. Once we start adding details in, it'll be fine. So I'm gonna add a little more opera, a few spots. Here it's going to look a little more pure, and that's kind of cool. And down here it'll mix a little bit more. Over here it's on top of some other blues and stuff, so maybe just a bit more of it. Well, actually, I'm going to come in with the permanent yellow deep instead of the permanent yellow in a few spots, kind of. And see, I've got a fair excess water. I can just kind of come in and pick some of that back up. Even if color runs down into it, that's okay. I'm going to hit it with a dryer for a minute and see how much I get dry, and then if I can get some of that to blossom. Because that starts to look like peeling paint and stuff when we get that to happen. So let me just hit this just for a second.
Now I'm just going to drop in a little bit of water here, see if I can't get this to blossom.
Put a little more turquoise down here in this corner. I just dropped some cerulean blue in there. The thing I like about the cerulean blue for this particular, type of of thing. It's that it's got that kind of chalky, you can see almost granulated look. And that, when it dries, gives you a really kind of cool texture for something like this. That's kind of interesting. It's not exactly how I wanted it to turn out, but it's still fairly interesting. I kind of like it. What I may do is, now that that's kind of dry, I may come in with just a bit of this peacock blue right here over the Sanders turquoise, just to brighten up a little bit of this bottom part of the door. And yes, I know that that's going to look weird, but once I add a little water and kind of allow this to kind of run down into some of that area, just felt like it needed just a bit of a brightening. That peacock blue can do that. It just adds a little bit more.
Then I'm going to place a little opera right in here. That'll help it pop just a little bit more and brighten it up.
Yeah, so I think that's pretty good. I mean, obviously this looks like a, kind of a blue mess right now, but later, once we add some detail to that, I think it's going to look really good. Since this is dry out here, I'm going to kind of do the shadow across here. I'm not going to do the shadow on the door yet. I'm just going to worry about the shadow on the wall, because this shadow is going to be slightly different than this shadow. And for this, I'm going to start with a little permanent magenta. You can see this right here. And then I'll kind of move through some of these purples and blues and whatnot. And I can see that I've got this line kind of coming along here. So I'm just going to kind of bring that in. It doesn't have to be super dark to be a nice deep shadow. Let's see, I'm going to move on to a little
Peacock blue just to kind of change up a bit.
Just throwing a little of that, which should have kind of a green tint to it. Up here, let's see. I don't want to get too close to that door with that, so I'm going to switch. I probably shouldn't have used that quite yet, but that's all right. I'm going to switch to some quinacridone violet, which is that slightly darker violet. Kind of bring that down in here. And then I'm just going to kind of paint around this door and the kind of beam.
I've got a bit of a curve right here I want to take into account.
And if you need to, when you get into a spot like this, you can always switch to a, let's see, I'm going to switch back to that permanent magenta. You can always switch to a smaller brush if you need to get into some of these tight spaces, which is here. And add a little more of that up into there so it's not quite as dry. I'm going to use a little royal blue because it's a little darker in this corner, but I still want, you can see it's fairly thin because I want a lot of that undercoat, that yellow that's underneath it to show through. Let's go back to this quinacridone violet here. Just kind of bring that in like so. Let those two kind of bleed together. Let's see. I'm going to mix a little quinacridone violet and royal blue together to get kind of deeper violet, which I kind of have already there a little bit, but I'm even going to, I think because there'd be just a wee bit of reflected light, I'm going to grab a little opera, drop in a few spots. just for giggles. Some more water in here.
Then I'm just going to take a thirsty brush and kind of pick up some of this excess water, just kind of lift it out a little bit, just to lighten this ever so slightly. Now I'm just going to kind of clean up this edge just a little bit to make it a little, smooth it out just a little bit. I didn't really like that little tick mark that I had in there. So I'm just kind of cleaning this up just a bit. Might need a little more water in my brush.
Go back to this. Actually, I'm gonna mix a little Hooker's Green with Royal Blue and get a nice little kind of green blue. And then what I'm going to do later is actually lift a little bit of this shadow back out where this curved wall is. Put that down in there. Add some water. Let's go back to this violet blue mix. Go down into here. Finish that out. So let me add a little more of that violet blue. And bring a little of that blue green over here. Just to help balance that out. Once it dry, you know, it looks a little dark and kind of, some of these spots look kind of brown on camera. But once it dries, I think it'll look a little less so. So we have that first bit of shadow. And again, it looks weird because the shadow's not on the door. Kind of thinking that this shadow should be a little lower down here. But what could be wrong? So, I just came in with some of that purple. I don't know why I used purple instead of that green, but that thing will come in with a little green right here. And let's bring that. Just felt like it needed to be just a bit lower than where I had it drawn. And having that extra little bit, you know, of texture there just by kind of not, you know, kind of haphazardly painting that with the side of my brush, I think kind of lends it a little extra texture. On camera, this stuff looks a lot dark, you know, like earthier and muddier. I mean, it is a little bit muddy, but it looks a lot more than what it is in real life. So I'm going to do a little work in these kind of pots. And I'm going to start with just the plant material and then work my way. And what I'm going to do, just so I have something to kind of keep my eye on, I'm going to just kind of draw some areas where I think maybe some flowers would be. So I'm just going to kind of know, okay, and I'm just kind of randomly picking these kind of groups of flowers, and I'm going to make sure that I paint around those.
Actually, if I was smart, I'd probably be using masking fluid to make it easier on yourself. That's what I'd do.
And you can see I'm not really worried about making these look, I mean, hopefully you can kind of see those shapes. They're not really shaped like flowers. They're just going to be color shapes, but they'll read like, you know, somebody will think, oh, that looks like a flower.
Obviously, the light source is coming somewhere from the left-hand side of the page.
I'm going to start with a little lemon yellow, in a few spots. Not too terribly worried about it being particularly. This is just some spots where I think maybe light will hit this plant. That's all I'm just, and I'm making it up. I'm not really too worried about it being perfectly correct. We'll use a little permanent green number 1 now. I'm just going to let this kind of hit where that yellow is.
That way they kind of bleed into each other and run together and mix on the page.
And this, this is just like my initial kind of pass. So I'll probably end up adding darker greens and stuff to this in spots. But right now, that's all this is, kind of the initial pass of color. Getting this down in here. And I'm just using my number 6 brush because it's fairly small and I can get into some tight spots.
And again, if I had been smart, I would have used masking fluid for this, but I did not.
Maybe I'll mix a little permanent or the lemon yellow with the green, number 1. That gives me kind of this slightly pea soup looking color, which is fine. Let's go into a little permanent green number 2 then. Just slightly darker, not a lot darker, but a little bit. Add a little more of that pea soup color that I mixed. I should have been over here, but that's okay. And again, this is just that kind of initial color. Back to that permanent green number 2. Maybe even a little hooker's green in a few spots. I'm going to come back later after this is dried and add a little bit more, but I want to add just a touch of hooker's green in a few spots. And I mean, you can see that, this is just kind of that impression of a potted flowering plant. And let's do the same over here. Come in with a little lemon yellow, some spots, highlight in there in a few areas. Some of this may go away, but for now, that's where it's at. Little permanent green number 1 in a couple of spots. And so I'm just kind of switching off between that lemon yellow and the permanent green number 1. And then some of that little bit of mix of the 2. Cool thing is, this doesn't really need, all this has to do is give the impression of a potted plant. It doesn't have to look like any particular potted plant specifically. If I was painting a portrait of just that, one of these flowers or something, then by all means, I would go in a little more carefully and think about petal shape and all that. Let's switch over to a little permanent green number 2. Some of these spots. But for this, we're just giving the impression that it's a potted plant. Care that it's a specific kind. I mean, we'll think of it like that, but eventually. But right now, we're just kind of go back to that permanent green number 1 yellow mix that I have going on here. Which now is a bit more permanent green than yellow, but that's okay. And again, until we add the color for the flowers, this is going to just look like some little weird blobs of green. Down in there, a little color, maybe a little hooker's green now, just in a couple of spots. So let's do, a couple of these. Let's do these pots too. I think I'm going to go in with a little of that azo yellow, just because it's a little lighter than the permanent yellow deep, but a little darker than lemon yellow. And I'm just gonna. This is gonna be a straightforward kind of gradient for right now. I'm just gonna kind of do this one and then I'll do that one. But it's gonna kind of be fairly straightforward. So I have this kind of light yellow kind of wash, and then I'm going to come in with let's see, the permanent yellow deep maybe, which is just slightly darker. Do a bit of that. Add a little water right here where it's kind of dried out a bit. And then move into this, more orange. And I want to do this all while it's still fairly wet because I want these layers of color to blend in, and run together, so I get a nice smooth kind of gradient. Let's go back for some more of that orange. And then maybe what I'm going to use, I think, is a little permanent red. I could use Scarlet Lake or something like that, but I think I kind of want to just come in with some of this permanent red, kind of clean this edge up. And this particular permanent red actually has a wee bit of kind of a pink tint to it when it gets thinned down. So that's kind of interesting. That little flourishy thing that happened there by accident is kind of interesting. So not a real hard thing. Let me do this other side over here while that's drying, and then I can do the lip. They're all very similar, or this will be just about identical to that. So a little azo lemon or azo yellow, I think, in here. And then a little permanent yellow deep. And a little permanent yellow orange. Where that comes in, let's go back to this permanent red. Back here in the corner. Yeah. I just like these bright pots. I don't know why. I like the pots to be super bright. Well, you guys know that I just like really bright colors. Got some of that. All right. Then I'll just do this lip real quick over here. And I'm just going to start with a little of the permanent yellow deep instead of that lighter azo yellow. Move into the orange. Just a hint of this red. Back over here. And maybe even, like I'm kind of feeling like maybe this needs just a hint of violet down in here. So I'm going to use this permanent magenta in here and then kind of smooth that out over, at least in this spot, just to give it a bit more value change. Do the same right here. And I'll eventually put in a little bit of a shadow here from the curve of the pot. I just haven't, this is kind of that, but not totally. So we'll get to that here in a little bit as well. And let's do a little bit of that over here on this one too. There's a little permanent yellow deep, a little permanent orange, or permanent yellow orange, I mean. And that may be all there's, maybe just a bit of that red. Doesn't need a lot. It's kind of a hint of it there. And we'll end up with a, with a shadow coming off of this stuff too to help, flatten this plane out. Because right now it just looks, I mean, it's starting to flatten out a little bit with this pot sitting on it and everything, but it's still going to be looking a little flat. It's not going to look like it has any depth yet. I think now I'm going to work on this little porch light. That's actually just kind of, it's pretty easy. What I'm going to do is actually just use a little peacock blue for the glass. And I'm not going to really go into a lot of detail on this. I'm just going to put a little wash of this peacock blue in there right here for this bit. Maybe just a touch more over here. They drew this on here crooked, but that's all right. And then a little over here, but then I'm going to add in a little bit of a darker cast to it. Just so it's, just slightly darker because it's on that side. Now, granted, light's going to be shining through it, so it's not really going to be that much darker. And then, how do I want to do this? I think I'm going to make this kind of rusty looking. So I think I'm going to start up here, and I'm going to start with some quinacridone gold, I think, just up in this area. And again, this is going to, and maybe a little opera. This is going to look a little sloppy at first, but once we go in and start adding details, it'll start coming together. So don't panic if yours looks a little weird. Let's see. I'm going to come in with a little. I'm going to use brown madder, but you could use burnt sienna. That would work great for this. Pull a little of that over in there. And maybe a little of this violet that I mixed up too, that kind of dark violet. Just put a little of it over here. I think I'm going to put a little peacock blue in that too, just so it has a little hint of maybe metal. And then, in fact, that's what I'm going to start with here as well. I'm going to start with a little peacock blue. And then come in with a little of that brown madder. Let's mix a little. I'm going to mix a little of that with some indigo, just to get a little darker kind of bit over here on this side. So I just kind of made, really what that looks like is burnt umber. I took a little, in my case, brown madder, but if you don't have brown madder, burnt sienna works just as well. And I mixed it in with a little indigo, but you don't necessarily have to use indigo. You could use royal blue or any of those and kind of look the same. And then I'm just going to put, kind of some hints of that around the edge. Here, and maybe we'll come down here with that. Let's go with a little less. So I'm going to add a little bit more of the brown madder or burnt sienna, whatever, and have, so it's a little lighter shade over here. Let's pull in a little more indigo on this one. On this side. And then a little more indigo right there. Maybe this whole side ends up being, well, it's going to be, kind of the shadow side. So, but the cool thing is, I mean, this doesn't have to be perfect. Let's see, I've got this little, I'm going to make this just kind of a dark hoop, where this hoop kind of comes up with a bit of a shadow on this side. So I'll just go ahead and paint that in to give that a little bit of dimension. And then I've got this kind of thing that comes off. I don't, it's not necessarily anything in particular. It's just kind of a little scribbly squiggle kind of thing that kind of looks like maybe it holds that lamp. Let's see. Let's come back in with a little of this kind of earthy color. Which is, that's mostly burnt sienna that I used right there. Let's go back to that indigo violet burnt sienna mix. I had a little bit of violet in there too, but it's close enough. Just add a little bit of a shadowy thing down there. Yeah. Maybe just a bit of a hint of something there. But again, I mean, I don't care if this looks, to me, it doesn't need to look perfectly real. I'm just kind of hinting at some sort of light fixture here that there's not a lot of detail. It's just kind of a little scribbly thing. And that's all it really is. It doesn't have to be perfect. Not sure why that has a little white spot. I'm going to put a little orange right in there. I don't mind it being a little lighter right there. Maybe it's caught a reflection or something. But I didn't really want it white. So yeah, I mean, that's really all that is. It's just like a 2-minute thing just to paint that lantern. And I've got a little shadow drawn there. I could do that real quick. And all that's going to be is just kind of this violet, probably this kind of violet-y color up in here that I've got, which was quinacridone violet. Well, I was using permanent magenta, but I'm going to use quinacridone violet and a little bit of peacock blue mixed in. I'll show you what I'm doing here. So I've got quinacridone violet right there. And then I just went over and grabbed a little of this peacock blue that's on my palette. And so I've got a couple of different violets there, maybe even almost 3. And I'm going to start with the lightest, that just pure quinacridone violet. And kind of come in with this shadow. And I want to leave some spots for the light kind of coming through. But what I'm going to do is actually lift that back out. So here's that. I'm going to go back into some of that kind of middle quinacridone violet, peacock blue, and then down here we're going to go into a little darker stuff. So again, I'm not super concerned with how accurately this shows. This, looks as far as being, this shape here. But As long as it kind of reads like that, I'm good. Clean that up just a bit. That, and that was just, I put just a hint of pure peacock blue right down there in the corner just for fun. And what I'm going to do is completely clean my brush out now and come back in kind of where I left that little bit of light showing through. I'm going to come back in and pick that up really quickly. So it looks like light coming through. Now, I don't want it to look rounded like that, so I'm going to come back in like there, kind of do that, and maybe there's a little bit here, but it kind of just, it starts to read like, light coming through that glass, just by picking that up a little bit. Still has a shadow, it still shows that there's light bouncing off of that, but it's also allowing some to pass through. So it just kind of reads, I think that's a little too thin though, so let me bring a little of this over here. Oh. Maybe a little of that peacock blue again. Yeah, like so. So it kind of has that feel of, let me flatten this end over here too. It has that feel of light coming through, but also some of the light not making it through. So it's a little dimmer than, what's there. And again, it's just a suggestion of a shadow. It may be a little too dark. What I may want to do is lighten it just a bit more. Just by, I've got this paper towel that's kind of wonky, but, well, it's because I use it to clean my palette. Let's see if I lighten that. It didn't really lighten it that much. Just a bit more water right there. Yeah. It doesn't look that much different on camera when I turn around and look at my monitor, but in person it looks a little bit lighter. So, yeah, just kind of fun. Technically there would be some sort of, it would be like this kind of hoop kind of shaped thing going on. And some sort of little shadow coming off over here. Well, this will make that look a little more like it's based on reality. Where that little doodaddy shape is. There we go. All right, so this is definitely dry now. So let's do this cast shadow, and I'm gonna use a round brush just because there's some tight spots. But I'm gonna move up to this number 10, and I'm gonna start with some royal blue. I want this kind of watered down though. And I picked up a little green in there as well. So it's going to look like I'm putting on a lot, but I'm going to add some water here. I'm going to clean my brush out and add water. So I have this kind of royal blue, and I'm just going to put that down. And then I'm going to move into a little violet. So I'm going to grab a little quinacridone violet and a little royal blue and kind of pull them down. And then this shadow is going to drop down just a little bit lower than where that was. And pull it across kind of like that. So there's a little of that. And again, it looks like I'm adding a lot, but I want this really wet, so I put some down and then I grab a lot of water. I kind of clean my brush out and grab some water. I'm going to switch it up to kind of this lighter permanent magenta. kind of more pink. Go back to this royal blue that I've got up here. And again, I want to be able to see a lot of that color showing through. So I don't like where that's ending up. So let's just pull in just a bit more. I'm just going to make sure that that whole window's in there. I didn't want it right at the corner. That was a little weird, wonky. So let's move into some of that. And maybe what I'll do is grab a little Hooker's green and really use some green and some royal blue. I don't know if you can see that. It doesn't look a whole lot different, but this is Hooker's green and royal blue right there. And I'm going to bring a little of that. Yeah, see, that's got that kind of nice aqua, dark turquoise kind of look. And I realized what I've just wasn't paying attention to what was going on over here. Maybe the roof does this other little wonky thing. I'm going to make it work. Wasn't paying attention. I'm going to make it work though, and I think that this actually will come in a little lower as it's back behind. That'll work all right. The great thing about shadows is they don't have to be perfect. Move over into a little of this violet. So I know this still looks like kind of a weird mess, but bear with me. Grab a little more of that dark, this royal blue violet.
Kind of down in this area here. I just want to add that violet, a little more violet down here.
See if I can't get any blossoms over here. A couple of spots just to give me some cool texture. I'm going to use a little opera, I think, just to displace some of this color and get more water. Didn't have enough water in my brush. I know that looks a little weird right now. Add some more water, that to run and do its thing. You can still see, in this spot, you can still see some of that color showing through in a lot of this area, actually. You can see some of that quinacridone gold. I'm going to add a little more water just to kind of lighten a few areas and just kind of lift some of that back up. All I'm doing is taking a clean, damp brush, kind of rolling it, picking some of that back up, some of that excess water. I'm not pressing really hard on the paper or anything. If I was, more paint would come up, kind of like what I did over here.
We'll just hit this with a hairdryer real quick and get that all dry.
I'm going to take a quick break and let you know about Utrecht Art. And I'm going to try and make this really fast because I know this is a very long video. My affiliate link is in the description. Clicking it will take you to my curated supply list, so be sure to check that out. I have some really cool stuff listed there. I also have a discount code for Meeden Art, which is MBW70 for up to 12% off your purchase. The link for that is below as well. Meeden is a great site for budget-conscious artists, especially those wanting to try watercolor for the first time. Don't feel that you need to order a bunch of stuff to try watercolors. If you have supplies already, then use those and upgrade as you can. The best supplies are the ones you already have. I also need to mention my own website, bulletgallery.com, where you can see the work I have for sale, including paintings that I've done on this very channel. The available prints tab is a pretty cool link to my Fine Art America page, where you can buy not only prints of my work, but all sorts of really cool household items like pillows, duvet covers, shower curtains, all printed with my paintings. Look for Michael Bullock Watercolors on Facebook and Instagram as well. Now let's get back to the fun.
And we're back working on the blue Taos door.
Okay, so I need a bit more, I've noticed I need to kind of fix this little bit of a curve right here. So I'm going to come in with this green right here that I was using on the same spot, kind of see if I can't make that curve a little bit more. And if it's not perfect, I'm not too worried about it. I keep trying to tell myself, okay, we're just having fun. This is just kind of a fun thing we're doing. So it's not, doesn't have to be perfect. We're practicing. And that's a little better. I like that curve a little bit better. But I also need a little bit of a shadow on the inside of this door to help push that back. So I'm going to take these kind of, this violet kind of color. I think I was using, here I was using permanent magenta. So I'm going to start off with some of that. And then I was using some quinacridone violet as well. What I'm going to do is just kind of pull this down. First with a little color, I can kind of soften that edge. And then I'll pull this down. And right now it's going to look a little wonky, but don't fret. Let's see. Let's come in with a little quinacridone violet and a little of the blue quinacridone violet blue mix. And then let's just kind of pull this down. Just like so. And then, you know, after this dries, I'm going to come over here and soften this line because it's a bit more of a curve, a soft, you know, a soft corner than a hard corner like I've just painted it. So I'm going to soften it. So, and I'm going to have, I forgot about this, but I'm going to have a little bit of a shadow on the door too. So I need to take that into account. But I'll do that after this dries because I don't want those two to run together. But you can see I've softened that line. You almost can't tell that there was anything there. And this looks quite a bit darker than it is on screen. So that's what's going on there. So let's let that dry. Well, actually, while that's drying, I'm going to come in and kind of deal with this shadow under here. Because while this is in shadow, there's this darker section that's the bottom of that beam that goes across the top of the door. So I'm just going to use some indigo for that. You could use like a real dark blue or whatever. I'm just going to use indigo though. Well, I may mix it. Actually, I'm going to mix it with a tiny bit of Hooker's green in it. So let me kind of show you. That's what this is right here. This kind of mix. It all looks very similar, but it is a little bit different. So I'm going to use that, and I'm going to come in. So I've got this kind of curve that comes down here, and then that back kind of plate, if you will. And that looks really dark, but it's not going to be that dark when it dries. And I'm just going to pull that across, get a little more water. And all that is really is just the underside of that beam. It's a really thick beam, at least in mine. And that's just going to help push that door back as well. So let me come over here and kind of soften this. That's still a little damp there, but that's all right. And all I'm going to do is just kind of come in with a clean brush, just soften this edge just a bit. They should have waited a little bit longer on that. That's okay. That was just a bit wet. Wetter than I thought. We'll just kind of come in like so. Soften it and then pick it up. So come in, soften this. every now and then I pick up a little bit of color, like wet, and put it on there so that it'll bleed over into this area where I'm softening and cause a little bit more softening. Clean the brush. That area up a little bit. That just gives us that kind of curve. We're going to end up with some shadows over here, so I'm not too worried about this not being as nice as that. But you can see I softened that quite a bit, so it looks a little more gradual, a little more curved, and starts to build that depth in. So it's going down into that doorway. So the doorway feels a little deeper. What I'm going to do over here is actually pick up some of this shadow bit here. Even though it's in shadow, it's going to be picking up just a wee bit more light. And to get rid of that line, I'll just come in and soften that. So I'm getting that little bit of reflected light, you know, where it's just gonna be picking up a little bit more light. So it's just a bit lighter in that shadow area. It also gives it that curve. Soften that a bit. I'm just going to add a little more purple over here. Just I didn't care for that lighter splotchy bit there. It doesn't look that light on screen, but on my painting, it looks a little weird. And then I want this side of the wall to look a little bit, you know, like here, to look just a touch darker than what I've got there. So what I'm going to do, and I don't want it a lot, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little pyro orange. But you could use just your cadmium orange or you know, I have a permanent yellow orange. I could use that. But in this case, I'm going to use a little pyro orange because it softens out to that nice peach color. So there's a fair amount right there. And obviously that's too much. But it's pretty wet. So I'm going to just kind of move it around a little bit with water. And then what I can do is really kind of come over here and soften this edge just with a clean brush. Pick some of that up. Let's see. Like so. But you can see I've kind of continued that just by adding just a wee bit of pyro orange. Or, you know, again, if you wanted to use, if you don't have pyro orange, if you want to use cadmium orange, whatever orange you've got, or even like I could use a little Scarlet Lake if I wanted to over here. And the fact that it's a little, you know, I've got these kind of broken up splotchy things where you know I haven't covered everything is okay because it's you know, it's an adobe house, so it's going to have that kind of rough plastered kind of look. But you can see just that little tiny bit that I added made that pop and look so much lighter, like it's catching more light, and that gives it that depth that I want. Let's do this doorknob. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a little bit of quinacridone gold and a little bit of burnt sienna and then a little bit of indigo, and I'm going to make this look kind of like a rusty doorknob. So I've got this quinacridone gold up in there, just a wee bit of it. I got it a little too dark, so I'll just pick some of that up. And then I'm going to come in with a little bit of that burnt sienna. Or if you don't, you know, want to use burnt sienna, if you have something like quinacridone burnt orange or quinacridone burnt scarlet. I've got one of those. That's kind of fun. Any of those. So while this is still wet, I'm going to come in and add a little of that. And so let me just add a little more water. And then I'm going to come in with a little of that indigo green mix that I made. And I'm just going to finish off this side of the doorknob with that. Just kind of come in around there. Let me see if I can zoom in on that so you can kind of see what's going on. Not, there's not a lot to it. All it is that little doorknob. And then I'll have a shadow that comes off of it as well. But pretty easy, little quinacridone gold, little burnt sienna, and a little indigo or royal blue mixed with green, hooker's green, or Prussian blue would have worked fine, or Antwerp blue, any of those kind of green blues. Yeah, and there's not a lot of detail in that. I don't need a lot. Maybe I'm going to drop just a hint of copper right in there, just to add a little tiny pop of pizzazz. Get that to bleed out. There we go. Nobody will ever notice it, but me. But it makes that just kind of sing a little bit more. And that's really all there is to that doorknob. Really simple. And then once that dries, which will be here in a second, I can add a little bit of a cast shadow from it. There we go. And I'll just come in with a little royal blue, maybe. This shadow is going to kind of come in right in there. I'm going to make it a little elongated, like so. And I don't know, can you guys see that? Just kind of zoom in on that. Yeah, just kind of pull that back down and make that shadow there. What I am going to do is make that edge of the, let me dry that real quick. I'm going to make that lead, that backside edge of the doorknob just a skosh darker. Just kind of come in like that. Maybe put a few dots of dark on there. I don't know if you can't really see it, but just made it just a skosh darker, just so it pops up from the shadow a little bit more. And then added just a few little dots of that dark on there as well. Not too bad. So far I'm pretty happy with this. I need to figure out what my plan is for this stoop. I think I'm gonna. I even though I've got some blue down on here, I'm not too worried about that. So what I'm gonna do is go over it with a layer of permanent yellow deep, or if you have just a kind of medium light orange, show you that's this color right there. And I have some on my palette here, and I'm just going to not worry about that color on top. That's just going to add another layer of texture. And all I'm going to do is so I've got a little bit of that down, and now I'm going to pull in a little of this permanent yellow orange. I'm going to end up painting a shadow over here anyway, a little bit of a shadow there. And then I think I'm going to, permanent yellow orange I think will be fine. I'm just going to pull that in like so. And really what I need to do is come back in on this face spot right there that needs a little. I'm going to come back in and actually do this entire face. So it's going to look a little flat for a second, but that's okay. So that was the permanent yellow deep, and then I've got some permanent yellow orange in here. I could even bring in just a touch of opera, just to give it a little bit of a different color change. Up in there as well. And this is going to look flat for a little bit until it dries and we do the next kind of step. But we need to get this first layer of color on. Even with that color on under there, it's going to help add to that texture. Now I want to look at some of, like this is close to dry. It's not quite dry yet. But I want to look at, this is going to, because the sun's coming this way, I'm going to have a bit of a cast shadow off of this. And perhaps, and really because it's coming in
from the upper left-hand side of the painting,
we're going to have a bit of a shadow on this wall as well. So really what I'm going to do is just kind of say, okay, well, this maybe kind of comes down like that. And that's my little bit of shadow. That's going to kind of be in shadow. And then this area is going to be in shadow so that I've got this kind of pot coming off here. And then maybe a little more. Well, and then there's going to kind of be this little bit of a triangular shadow. So it's going to kind of do that kind of a thing. And then maybe there's some sort of something that's coming in here that I want to add. Maybe there's, a tree out in the yard or something that's kind of casting some sort of shadow. Let's see, there's going to be a bit of a shadow on this, like so. And maybe even something like that, just to kind of, we're just going to end up making that slightly darker. So I don't know. Let's see. I don't know what this is. Maybe this is a post. It doesn't really matter. I'm just telling a story. I just want something to kind of pull you in here, pull you up this way, and back around over to here. So that's what I've done here. Why I ended up putting this here, because my door originally was supposed to be over further. So I added this little guy because I had this centered so much. So I want some sort of, some sort of shadow in here that'll pull you in. Then you'll come up, you'll see this and get pulled in this way. That pulls you back down and around. This shadow kind of pulls you in into this doorway. And then when we get to it, we'll have this little medallion thing in this space here that'll kind of help tell that story. So I want to do some of these shadows now. I'm going to kind of do something similar to what I did up here. I'm going to start off with a little quinacridone violet. And I'm just going to start up in here. And I'm not too worried about following that pencil line I drew on there or even mimicking what's really here. Doesn't matter. You can't see what I'm doing. It doesn't really matter because people won't notice that it's different. I think I'm going to switch now to a little peacock blue here where it starts to get a little cooler. And I want that to kind of run up into the purples or that violet. Now here it gets a little weird, so it's just going to kind of disappear. That shadow is not going to be on that part of the door. It's just going to be out here. Let's see, I'm going to go back. I'm going to go to a slightly darker purple now. So what I did was just added a little bit of that Hooker's Green blue mix to my quinacridone violet, and you can see it just made it slightly darker. And then this is going to come down. Maybe it gets a little darker down in here. So what I'll do is add a little bit more of that Hooker's Green blue mix, so it gets a little bit darker purple. I'm not really liking that color on top of that. It's not going to hurt anything. I just think it needs to be a little warmer right there. Back in here, I wanted it to be a little cooler. Here, I want it to be a little warmer. Maybe a little of that peacock blue again. And then even into this little bit of this cast shadow. And really, this is just, maybe this comes up a little bit more right there. I'm just trying to sort of change that shape a little bit of that shadow. Let's come in with a little lighter Hooker's Green blue mix. So now I'm taking a little Hooker's Green and a little Peacock Blue. That just makes it a slightly brighter blue-green. And I'm letting that touch in a couple spots so it bleeds together, but then I'm also not letting it touch in some spots so that I have little lines of light just to help change those shapes a little bit or define those planes. Because I have the plane here of the step, then I have a plane that goes back into space. This is a flat plane. That's a vertical plane. Then another flat plane. Let's see. Let's go back to this kind of warm quinacridone violet, or warmer, because it's still a fairly cool color. I'm going to use a little opera because maybe there was a little bounce of light off of something. Slightly darker purple. Some of it up in there. This is kind of the smooth part of the pot there, and then maybe this is where those leaves are kind of bunching out a little bit. That was a little dark what I grabbed there. That was that dark Hooker's Green blue mix that bled into a little of the purple. But that's okay. It won't hurt anything. But that, that kind of gives that impression of there's a nice little cool spot right there. We have this kind of intense warm coming through here, and that cools it off quite nicely. And then I think I'm going to go ahead and put this shadow in too, just to help sort of define some of this stuff. And then once that dries, I'll put in kind of a darker shadow here. I drew this coming in almost to that point. So I really need this to come up. Maybe it comes up like that. Let's start with a little, I think, just plain quinacridone violet. It's going to kind of come in like so. I'm going to use a little actual alizarin crimson on this in a few spots. So this is going to be a fairly warm shadow, then it'll cool off.
So now we're going to come in with a little of that quinacridone violet mixed with a little Hooker's Green and just a skosh of royal blue.
To kind of cool it off in a couple spots. Maybe it's kind of glowing over there on the edge. Let's go into some of this actual Hooker's Green blue mix that's darker. Maybe this is a post or something. Let's come back to some of that violet blue mix. And I want to be pretty careful next to this edge of this pot. So carefully laying that in.
With the side of my brush.
And then as I get back out here, this can kind of bleed back into there. Maybe this. But that now pushes this pot forward. Just add a little more water.
To get that to naturally blend together a little bit better.
I'm going to kind of pull this over here up. Just make it a little wider. Now I've got a line that's kind of starting there. I need to kind of scrub that out. Maybe if I throw in a little alizarin crimson again right in here, that'll kind of help. I don't like that shape.
So I'm going to change it here with a little alizarin crimson. That just was weird. I don't like that shape. It's got this weird bend that I don't quite understand. I just can't think of a reason for that bend to be there. And it's kind of an ugly shape, so I'm just going to straighten it out here.
On this terracotta pot, I'm just going to use some alizarin crimson. Kind of start down here where maybe it's a little warmer. And then I'll work into that quinacridone violet.
And then I'm just going to add a little bit of water here just to lighten that up a bit.
Then I'm going to add just a little alizarin crimson. I'll start down here. And then I could even go a little darker on this because it's over here in the corner. So there's a bit of a... And that was just taking some of that really dark purple that I mixed. If you feel like you got it too dark, you can always come back in and flip some of that back out. Just to give it a little... Maybe there'd be a little bit of a shadow
Up in this area here.
a little bit of that quinacridone violet blue mix. It's right in under there. Probably wouldn't be here, but it doesn't matter. I'm just kind of adding it just to give it a little sharp edge right there. And then maybe just a little bit over here. Now these flowers, we could probably go ahead and put them in. And what I'm going to do is a little opera and a little scarlet lake. But what I'm going to do is just come in with a little opera in a few of these spots. Put kind of a little, well, my hand was kind of covering up what I was doing there. Put in just a little blob of color in a few spots. Well, I'm going to do all these flowers really quick. Opera, and some, kind of high on the flower. And then I'm going to come in with a little scarlet lake and see what happens. This is just kind of a little experiment. I've got that little hint of pink, and then I come in with this salmony red, and that starts to look a little bit more like
A geranium.
if you don't have scarlet lake, you could use permanent red. Let me zoom in on that so you can kind of see what I did. See, you can still see that opera. And I wasn't too worried about completely filling that in. If I've got a little white showing, I'm okay with it. This is that impression of these flowers. So I'm going to come back in now in this other pot of plants. And I'm just going to hold it closer so you can kind of see what I'm doing. Putting a little opera. Just a little bit of that opera, and then I'll come back in and let this scarlet lake kind of run into it. And then where I just have a little pink, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to leave that. But there we have it. Impression of flowers in a pot. I'm actually thinking that I want this shadow to come down there. I'm going to take that dark purple that I've got there. It won't be the exact dark purple,
but it'll be close enough.
Maybe a little bit more of this darker color coming down in there. And I know that doesn't look like it's going to blend in, but once I kind of feather it out with some water, even if there's a little texture on top, that just felt like it. That felt like it gives me this reason for this, this thing to kind of pull up.
And I'm just going to add a little Hooker's green mixed with royal blue right in here just to kind of blend that in as well while it's still wet.
Again, it may not be based on anything in reality, this shadow, but it felt like it needed something to help pull your eye kind of up. And maybe, that sort of ties in, maybe this is a post or something. So it helps tell that story. Okay, so we're going to put a little bit of detail into this door. I think the window I'm just going to do fairly dark with a few little highlights of where light maybe is bouncing off of it. So I'm going to use indigo and Hooker's green mixed together. Again, a Prussian blue or a Antwerp blue mixed with Hooker's green would be fine, or royal blue if you've got that. Maybe there's a few little spots where light's bouncing off of it. And I can kind of clean up this shape a little bit. Maybe now I want a kind of fairly dark violet in there as well. I'm going to take actually some of that same color that I just made and mix that with a little of my quinacridone violet right here. I don't want this to be super bright white like it is, so later I'll come back in and knock that back a little. Right now I want this to dry. There's my window, pretty simple. It's just dark. You know, the inside is darker than outside. And then what I can do is dry that really quickly. If I zoom in, you can kind of see that purple in there a little bit better. But now what I can do is come in with a little peacock blue or something like that and just knock that back a little. And even if I pick up some of this other color in there, it's okay. I'm just knocking those highlights back just a skosh so they're not bright white. So, I mean, it's there, but it's real subtle. So now I want to put a little detail into this. And this is where we're going to use a pretty fine brush. I'm going to use my number 6. And I'm just going to take that same, so it's that same dark color right here, this dark blue-green that I mixed with indigo. I used indigo and Hooker's green. You could even just use like pure Prussian blue. But I've got this nice kind of dark blue-green. It doesn't even have to be blue-green. If, like I said, if you just wanted to use Antwerp blue or Prussian blue or royal blue. So I'm just going to take a little of that. And because I've been mixing with this brush, I'm gonna roll my brush so I can get that really nice point as I pull it up. And I'm gonna come in here and I'm gonna start thinking. I'm gonna work myself. I'm gonna work from left to right because I'm right-handed. So I'm gonna start with this frame. It's gonna be this kind of thicker piece of wood. Sticks out a little bit more, so there's going to be a bit of a thick shadow line. And I can already tell my line's not straight, but it's straight enough. If we had painted this before we painted the shadow, we'd have to come back in here and redo this, which is why I waited till now. And then I'm going to have, so I have this top piece of wood that's, the door frame. And I'm going to start with the deeper, thicker part all the way across until I get to that edge right there. And I was making that fairly thick. Now I want to make it a little bit thinner because this is where there's the two boards meet. I kind of want to do that here as well. So kind of a thinner line. It's hard to see, but it really is. And then on this side, I'm going to do it a little bit thinner. And I'm just going to bring that down. There is our door frame. I'm going to, so I have the tops of the doors. I have this sort of side of the door. So I'm going to have that kind of come in. And I need to think about this. It's going to be a fairly thin line until I get to about here. And then it'll be thicker. There'll be a bit of a shadow. And then here, and it's hard for you guys to see on camera, I'm sure, because I can barely see my pencil lines. But then right here, it's going to get thinner. Then it's going to get thicker. Where that board, that center board is. And then down here where this kickboard is, or kick plate or whatever would be, it's going to be thinner again. Come down like so. This one, the top plate here, and this is going to be all fairly thick. This would be thin again where it meets that board. And then got to come in this one. And then this one would have a bit of a shadow underneath it. So I'm going to paint this line a little bit thicker because of the shadow. And then over here, again, this is going to be kind of a thinner line like that, but slightly thicker than this part. Come on down until I get to where that bottom plate is. I've now created a little bit of depth just by painting those few lines. I decided to just really simplify this upper part of the door. We're going to have a board coming down like so. And then now I need to think about this frame around this window. So and then there's going to be a bit of a shadow. So this side's going to be a bit thicker. This side's going to be a bit thicker. And then I'll just, kind of pull in these boards here. Some of these are thinner boards than others. And you can see that I'm not painting the whole line. I'm leaving some spots where I didn't paint that line. It no longer looks like just a flat blue plane. It's now starting to look more like a door, just by adding these little things. So in mine, I've got these, it's a little hard to see, but I've got a panel here, a panel here, and a panel here. And really, these are kind of indented panels, and then they're raised back out. But I'm going to simplify it a little bit for these two sides.
I have the side and upper portion of this indented panel. That's why that's why they're thicker lines on the left-hand side and the top, because they're a cast shadow. And then the right-hand side and the bottom will be thinner lines. And that pushes that panel in visually.
I'm going to do the same here. I've got this, and then the thicker shadow here. And a fairly thin line, and a fairly thin line. So going along, just doing the same thing here. So I've added a little bit of, indentation here. I can even add a little more detail. That's going to be a piece of wood going across. Each one of these is going to be a piece. You don't necessarily have to go in and tell that whole story, but you can do what you want. Now I'm going to have a little piece that's raised back out, and that's going to be a little carved piece that we create. So I'm going to draw it on there just so it's a little easier to see what I'm doing. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to do a fairly thin line on both the top and this left-hand side, because there won't be a shadow on that, and then a fairly thick line on this because there would be shadow cast from it. So now it looks like it's raised back out. And then while that's doing its thing, I'm going to come in and kind of make up a little rosette. So I'm going to draw a little kind of circle right here.
And then I'll just kind of come in and fill in these little other portions of the rosette. Just kind of making it up as I go along.
So I've drawn on this little rosette, and now this is going to be carved out of this piece of wood. So it's going to be indented back in. So I have to start thinking about where these little indentions are going to be, where shadows are going to be. So I know that because this is partially going to be shadowed like that, I'm going to draw or paint on that little bit there. just that little tiny bit. Here, it's going to be kind of just right there. For this one, it's going to be this whole side here. For this one, it's going to be kind of like this. And then this one's going to be kind of like that. This one will be kind of like that, maybe. This one will definitely be that shape, and then I'll just kind of give it a little bit of it. So you can see I'm just kind of making, these little additions, and then so this one is going to have just this bit here. And then once that dries, I'll get rid of that pencil line by erasing it. I'm going to come in and add wear and tear on this door. So I want this to look kind of beat up, give it some character. So I'm going to add a few streaks like that in there. That's not the best I've ever done. I can pull in a streak like that. I can even add a little bit of an eye. You can see I kind of have a crack with a little bit of a knot there or something. I can come in. There's a couple of cracks there. Maybe there's a good sized crack over here. So I'm going to add some weathering to this just by adding a few little lines and things. Maybe there's a crack up there. Some down here, just where you're getting the wear and tear on the boards. Down at the bottom, I want a pretty good dark line down here to kind of show that there's dark back in under there. And I think about the direction that I'm painting these cracks has to do with the direction the grain's going to be running in a board. This board is going to have to be running this way. The grain's going to be running this way. This board, the grain's going to be running this way. So that's why I've chosen the direction that these cracks and lines and whatnot are going. And really, it's just kind of playing around with it. I don't want to go too overboard with these, so I just add a few on each one. But that starts to look like an old, beat up, interesting door that has a lot of character. And it's very lightly loaded brush. It's kind of dry, almost a dry brush technique where I'm just barely touching the paper. This is going to have some thicker, it's a thicker piece of wood, so maybe it has some thicker cracks and things. Got a nice, what looks like maybe a crack that's right there. I don't know if you can see it. I can barely see it because of the glare. I'll go back in and read a little brush. So just come in. Like so, it's just got, this weird, interesting crack that happened. And that was just because I messed up painting that line. Yeah, just adding a little bit of that grain to this board, these boards, just makes it feel a little more wood-like. You know, I don't want to go overboard with those, and they're really light, but you know, they're not as dark as these lines that I use to sort of divide the spaces up. So I want to kind of separate this out a little bit more. I had this kind of line that formed there, and I'm going to kind of get rid of the line, but by making this just a wee bit darker. I'm going to use some pyro orange, but you could use any regular orange, cadmium orange, whatever you're using. I'm just going to kind of come in and accentuate that, but not with a line, but actually a thick kind of shape. I'll just pull that in. And then as I get down in here, I could start dry brushing. Oh, you can't see that very well. Let's just do this. You can see I've dry brushed some of that. So it's fairly wet up in there. And then I just kind of came in and pulled some of that down. Just to add a little texture. And maybe add a little bit more of that color over here, but then just kind of move it around with the brush. Not worry about covering everything. But that helps flatten this out more here and helps add a bit of a, that makes that look vertical and this look horizontal. And I'm going to do the same here to this. I'm just going to add just a bit of this pyro orange just right here along this line. Now, right now it looks too dark. But when I come back in with a little water, we'll still see that yellow coming through. But now we've kind of made that, even though there's a pencil line there, and I could see the pencil line, you guys have probably seen the pencil line. It accentuates that without being a line, an actual line. And because it's a little crooked here, I mean, this is completely accidental, but that looks like the spot where a lot of people step, so it's worn down. So that's kind of fun. That's starting to come together. I want a little bit of a shadow from this wall on the door. I'm going to just come in with a little wash of that peacock blue green mix, and I'm going to pull that down.
And honestly, I probably should have painted this when I did that whole part of the shadow. I just forgot. So I'm going to have to kind of work to get rid of this edge that's in there. I'll have to do a little scrubbing, but I should be able to make that blend a little bit better.
Let me come in with a little bit of just royal blue. Now, it looks like I'm getting darker than this thing. What it really is doing is picking up that line that I painted there. Painting around the doorknob because it's sticking out further, so it could be in white. I know this is curved. In my head, the wall's a little off. So in my mind, maybe there's a little bit of a curve to the, a dish in the wall. I ended up making this a little too wide up here. But that's okay. Yeah, I still got that line.
So I'm just going to scrub this with a little bit more water. And then I'm going to bring in some royal blue here. And maybe a little bit of that deep violet that's a mix of quinacridone violet and royal blue. And then I'm just going to kind of straighten this edge out here, make it a little wider so it can meet up with everything. So the curve won't be quite as prevalent as it was. I'll still have that kind of dished look. Uneven adobe wall, but it won't be quite as curved.
And you can see how this shadow here that I added really helps that doorknob pop out. So that's kind of a nice thing that happens there.
So I'm just taking a little bit of indigo blue here and deepening those lines that I had to paint over and scrub just to make them pop a little bit more because they got a little bit muted when I painted that shadow over them.
So I spent a little time looking at this from a bit of a distance. And I know there's some things we need to do to kind of finish up. But one of the things that's really bugging me is this. I don't like how I did that shadow. So I'm going to come in and kind of soften this. I just don't care for how sharp that is and how far out it comes. So just a little bit of water will soften that. It needed that darker shadow, but I think I just overdid it a little. And I'm happy with that. This one, I don't mind so much because that feels like it's some other kind of thing that's casting that shadow. This was just the roundness of the pot. And I just didn't care for what I did there. So that's why I wanted to go back in and kind of soften that back. I wanted that slightly darker shadow. And then this big, huge gap here, but it's drawing too much attention. So I want to come in and do something with that. So I'm going to come in with some of that kind of green blue. Maybe I could just soften this first. I think just having a solid shadow back down there will actually work a little bit better. And this is just that the way a painting will evolve as you're working on it. Sometimes you'll do something and you'll think, well, that's not working. So you just kind of come up with a new plan. Yeah, see, I like that better. It's not perfect by any means. But I like that shape of that shadow a little bit. I was trying something and I don't feel like it worked that well. So I wanted to come in and just soften that and fill that in, make it a little bit darker than it was. It was kind of like how glaring these little bits were in the glass. That was it was just too much and it was kind of pulling my eye here. And that's not where the area of interest is, which is why I need to knock this pot back. It's so bright right there in the corner that while it's doing its job of pulling your eye there, it's kind of keeping you trapped. So I want to, the first thing I'm going to do is actually do a little bit more shadow on these plants. So I'm going to come in with a little of that purple-green mix that I made and then some of that green-blue mix. And I'm just going to kind of add some shadows to this spot. So I'm just going to kind of come in and add a little bit of darker stuff. Now I'm doing this while this is dry because I don't want it to run into each other. I'm just going to do a little of that. Maybe come in with this purpley color. Can't really tell on screen. Basically, I'm just making some darker sections of this. So I'm breaking this light green shape up.
It's a little hard to tell here, but I'm basically switching back and forth between that green blue and the sort of dark violet made with Hooker's green as well. I'm really sorry that my hand is in the way. I wish I had the ability to turn my hand invisible just to make it a little easier for you guys to see what I'm doing.
Before this gets too dry in some spots, I want to soften that edge just a bit by adding some water. I don't want it to be super runny like it was when we were painting initially, but I do want it softer. Particularly the further we get this direction. So I have some hard edges and some soft edges in that. I know that in theory this should be darker, but I like that. I like that contrast that's going on there, so I'm not going to make that darker. I'm going to make it darker down here. So maybe there's a little bit of light coming across, hitting that. Dark, but still some light hitting that as well. I'm going to come over here and do some more shadow on this.
So right here, I'm basically doing the same thing that I did on those other potted plants. I'm just adding
darks switching back and forth between the blue-green and the sort of violet-green. And you may be thinking, well, why are you using violet? But being a complementary color to green, that violet helps make those plants look more vibrant. So even though it's a kind of a purple, they're much more vibrant because of that. It's a little hard to tell here on this screen, but there is a difference between the two darks that I'm using. And I'm also going to soften those just like I did with the others. I put them in and then I add a little more water just to make the edges softer in areas, so I have some lost and found edges.
And again, I mean, I'm not really painting leaves. I'm just kind of painting little tick mark and blobby shapes that somewhat look like plant foliage. I want to knock this back just a bit. I think I'm going to try it with a little scarlet lake. No, I'm going to use a little alizarin crimson. Not a lot, so it's going to be a real thin wash of alizarin crimson to kind of help knock this back. And if I get too much on there the first go, I can always add more water here. Oh, no, that's good. So you can see I just knocked that back just a bit. Still has that same kind of light.
It's just not quite as overbearingly bright.
We got a little bit too much, I think, up here. So I'm just going to take a piece of toilet paper that I kind of rolled up, kind of lift back out some of it. But that helped knock it back. I think I could probably knock this back just a skosh as well. It's so bright next to the edge of this paper. You feel like that got a little dark. So maybe if I come in here with this brush with just a wee bit of water in that rolled up piece of toilet paper, and just kind of lift that back up. Now, see, now that's too late. But I can just add a little more water to it, and it'll bleed back over, and I think that'll be fine. Let me kind of dry it.
So right now I'm just coming back in with my brush. I'm using a little bit of indigo, and I'm just sharpening these edges up a little bit so they look a little bit more like reflections of light on the glass.
I think I'm pretty happy with this.
So now we're going to do one of my favorite techniques, which is spraying a fine mist of blue around the edges. In this case, I'm using cobalt blue in a spray bottle. It's a mix of a little bit of paint inside the spray bottle with a lot of water.
So it's this guy. Now I'm going to shake it up really good before I use it. But I basically need to get all of the paint residue that is on the bottom. I need to get mixed up really good. What I am going to do is I'm going to take the top off, and I'll show you. I'm going to stick it in my water and kind of make sure that the nozzle is pretty clean. I don't want it to get clogged up. And then what I do is I'll take a few more little practice spritzes until I get blue paint coming up, which I am. And then I'm going to kind of spritz the edges of this just a little bit. Not a lot, but it knocks back those edges a bit. And helps really pull you in to this right here. So you can see I added just that little bit of blue spritz, and it's mostly, it's predominantly water. It looks dark, but it's not. If I grab toilet paper here, kind of clean up my board a bit. But you can see it knocked this back a little bit. It's still bright, but not overly bright. It's not really, your eye is being pulled into this area here. where I want you to be looking. This is just there to kind of help stop you and bring you back around. And this isn't one of my special, these bottles with the multi-size dot pattern. This is a fine mist sprayer.
And these bottles are available just about anywhere. You can get them at grocery stores, online, just about anywhere. Art supply places like Utrecht Art or Meaden Art both carry them.
That was so much fun to revisit that painting. Every time I do something where I've maybe painted something before and then I revisit it, come up with new ideas of ways to improve it or change it, make it more interesting. So I sincerely hope you enjoyed this longer video format. If you made it this far and are enjoying what I'm doing, and if you'd like to continue to get my videos, take a second, tap the subscribe button, and click that little bell to get notified of my next video. It's absolutely free. While you're at it, click the like button and share the video with anyone you think would also like it. Be sure to check out my affiliate links in the description below and visit my website, bullockgallery.com. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. My handle is @MichaelBullockWatercolors. Leave a comment and let me know if you're having fun. And as always, if you have a question or comment, please leave it below. I would love to hear from you. Plus, it helps with that all-consuming algorithm. I sincerely hope you look forward to next week's video as much as I do. So with that, I will say goodbye. I'll see you all in the next video. And remember, life is too short to paint on cheap paper.